do so in a moment. But let me welcome Representative Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts. Jake, it's great to see you, and thank you for joining this. We've had a very robust discussion with the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee from Latvian Parliament, with you just heard the EU ambassador to Ukraine, with some of your Jim Himes and others. And I have been interested in where you're at, because you are not only interested in what America's kind of global capacity is with what, NATO, Ukraine, et cetera. You've been focused on China. And today I'm sort of interested in what problems, as we're in the week where the National Defense Authorization Act is being discussed, what do we need to fix? What are we getting wrong? What are your worry points? And I see Alexander Hamilton behind you, and I'm very thrilled by that. So
thanks for having me on, Steve. Let me start with an amen to what Representative Kinzinger was saying about strength against Russia. I think we have to look at the geopolitical reality right now vis-a-vis United States and China, United States and Russia, and then Russia and China. And what that looks like is China is probably not going to stop providing economic and industrial support for the Russian war machine. They see persisting the Russian invasion as being to their advantage. They think, I think mistakenly, but this is the CCP's calculation, right, that it wears down Western resolve and distracts us. I actually think they're wrong about that, but that's their calculation. But China has also, I think, been fairly clear that they are not going to meaningfully supply materiel to Russia, and they are going to reject Russian saber rattling around nuclear escalation. So if we accept those two premises, what that tells me is we have got to unleash the Ukrainian armed forces to strike Russian energy infrastructure in the Russian heartland. Because the only way that the Kremlin is able to support their war machine and repivot their economy towards an industrial defense economy is through the hard currency that they're getting from energy exports. We're not going to get help from China and India on that. But we also know that Russia claiming that they're going to escalate to a nuclear level, I think, is not a particularly credible threat. And so,
but they are having tests on near the Ukrainian border right now, tactical nuclear weapon tests, just to kind of do the full record thing. Do those nuclear weapons, nuclear tests, field tests that they're doing worry you at all?
Of course it worries me. Anytime you get a nuclear armed state led by Vladimir Putin doing nuclear tests, yeah, that's concerning. It's not a good thing. Should it drive our strategic decision making? No, it should not. Vladimir Putin needs to know that to the extent that he is waging this war, the Ukrainians are going to be striking the Russian energy industrial base, their troop staging sites, their economic war machine in Russia. And it's going to be persistent, it's going to be pervasive, and it's going to be designed to cripple their ability to wage war in Ukraine. Right now, we're asking Ukraine to fight with one arm tied behind its back because it can't actually hit back.
What you've been sort of talking about something interesting that I had not focused on before, Jake. That was, looking at this Article 42.7 in Europe versus Article 5 of the NATO treaty. Can you explain to us what your concerns, what your issues are within 42.7, and kind of educate our audience to that as well, because they may not be familiar?
Article 42.7 of the Treaty of Lisbon is the European Union's version of collective defense. And right, I can't give you chapter on verse in the exact legal wording, but some legal scholars would actually say that from a legal interpretation, it actually is a stronger wording than even NATO's Article 5, in the sense of requiring member states to come to each other's aid in the event of an attack. And it does precisely mention armed aggression as one of those galvanizing factors. It's only been invoked once, 2015, by France. And politically, it is perceived of as being subordinate to NATO's Article 5. But that's a political choice. And the reason I raised 42.7 is that I think it's going to be a key element of defining victory in Ukraine, which I see as a secure eastern border for Ukraine, as freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, and as accession to the European Union. And that accession to the European Union by Ukraine is going to require a security conversation about what 42.7 actually means to the agreement of Ukraine. And that conversation should probably start happening now.
Jake, I'm going to ask you a high concept question. It may kind of not fall well. I'm trying to forget it. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you sort of felt you had that sort of Tom Friedman the world is flat. Nations are going to all look like us. Globalization was kind of spreading trust in institutions and people and ideas more frictionlessly around the world. And now we're talking a lot. I mean, conversation is really, we're all very interconnected, but it's sort of a high fear form of globalization rather than a high trust form of globalization. And I think that particularly in the China front, we have a question here from Mike Poznansky that he texted me on whether or not there are trade-offs between what we need to do with Ukraine, say what we need to do with preparedness for Taiwan. But people are beginning to think of the world as a much more fragmented, even balkanized place where there's disaggregation going on rather than aggregation. I'm wondering, because you do think so much about China and getting these equities right, how do you navigate that map?
China is trying to be a global power. It is trying to overturn the Pax Americana rules-based order that we helped architect post-war. And Xi Jinping has been very clear about that. You listen to his speeches to the Chinese Communist Party that are meant for a domestic audience. You listen to what he said to Vladimir Putin. There's no ambiguity here. That is their goal. The great national project of rejuvenation is directed towards that. And to counter that, we need to have a global operating system that is more attractive for countries to plug into than what China is offering. And I very deliberately use that term operating system because that's really what it is. It's not just trade. It's not just investment ties. It's not just security. It's not just multilateral institutions. It's all of those things. It's a ecosystem of behavior and engagement that countries say, I want in. And in Europe, I think that looks like NATO and European Union. In the Middle East, that looks like the Abraham Accords. In Latin America, it's some version of Mercosur or other engagements. In the Indo-Pacific, I think it's keystoned by the US-Japanese security relationship that needs to expand to a free and open Indo-Pacific concept that really should include trade ties with the TPP. In Africa, we don't really have an answer. I mean, Power Africa is a start, but we got to do a lot better than that. And I think it starts with US-Nigerian bilateral ties. Nigeria, I think, is probably the most underappreciated regional superpower in the world today. So we have to, this operating system needs to be manifested in different ways on different continents, but the thread is going to be the US working with our allies or even our fence-sitting partners to create a platform on which their citizens want to build their lives in the 21st century. We have to offer
in that
something.
Global bridge building that you're talking about. Do you feel like we're pretty tragically behind and can catch up? I should tragically behind and catching up don't go together. Do you think we're not so far behind that we can catch up, or are we tragically behind and can't catch up?
I actually don't think we're behind. I don't really accept that premise.
Okay.
We have to have I think a self-aware view of where we're at. And where we're at is we're coasting off of the success of the 20th century. And that's given us a head start. I mean, China's only been doing this for a decade. We've been doing this for 70 years in some form or another. We have a lot of substantive advantages to go with. Number one being people like freedom, law, and democracy. They don't like a techno-authoritarian surveillance state. So we got a lot going for us.
And yet there's a lot of support for those. I'll talk to you. I mean, we've got a couple of quick questions that I'd love to get into you, Jake, because I know you've got to run too. But we have Caroline Atkinson, who's a friend, a former deputy national security advisor, said all of this is great, but how do we make the policymakers, especially in the U.S., move? Your thoughts?
Well, I'm on the select committee on China, which is designed precisely to do that. It's not a committee of jurisdiction. It is a committee of investigation, awareness, and political momentum building. And we've been successful in that. The TikTok divestment is meaningful in that we are countering an ideological strike by the Chinese Communist Party. I'm trying to build support for reauthorization of the generalized system of preferences, which is functionally a rebalancing of trade towards the global south away from China. I think we need to be thinking about our relationship with Japan and Taiwan and South Korea and Australia in more substantive and engaged ways. And that looks like the Coast Guard in the South China Sea. And that looks like getting rid of double taxation for Taiwan. So these conversations are happening. They're being done through the lens of China, which is fine. But we need to have a bargain in place where it's not just tough on China. It's tough on China plus better engagement with the rest of the world.
Right. So thank you. I see Carolyn's face, though. Thank you for that. We're going to go real fast here. I also asked former Ambassador Andras Simonyi, who's at the Atlantic Council. I don't know if you have a question, but I'm so thrilled you're here. And you also were the ambassador of Hungary to the U.S. So very quick form, 30 seconds, Andras, thoughts, reactions, question for Jake Auchincloss.
Sure, I will not mention the H word.
Neither will I.
Because it breaks my heart. There are a couple of very quick comments. First comment is, I want to something that the Congresswoman was into that I think we have basically related great territory in the soft power theater,
Right.
and I think it's a huge mistake. I think this used to be very much part of our strategic toolbox. The second, I don't think there is enough awareness in Washington. I'm spending a lot of time in Brussels these days. I don't think Washington is aware of the growing anti-American sentiments in Europe, and that's very very dangerous. The third thing I want to say is that I don't think Washington realizes how Europeans, many Europeans, and a growing number of Europeans are taking equidistance between Europe and the United States and Europe and China. That is very dangerous. So the bottom line is, this is a fascinating conversation, but I do think that in many ways the discourse across the Atlantic needs to change in a couple of months. And I think I hope we will use the NATO summit to change the course of the conversation across the Atlantic.
Thanks so much. I was given a note that I really butchered my friend Jacques, the Swiss ambassador's name. My apologies, Jacques. I would love to invite you to make a comment or make a comment from your perspective. I want to mention the ambassador of Switzerland to the U.S. He'll be departing soon, was the former head of intelligence in Switzerland. But your thoughts, Jacques, ambassador.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. And I will be departing to NATO. I'll be the next ambassador, the Swiss ambassador to NATO. So we are in remaining in security policy. I'm totally flabbergasted by the way European countries, including mine, have become addicted to the peace dividend. And it's really an interesting phenomenon that we have been now 2 years into the process of understanding what kind of threat Europe is facing and how urgent it would be to rebuild the industrial capability, because it's not just about buying whatever is on the market, but it's recreating the industrial capability. And I see almost none of them, including not in my country. One exception maybe is France, where France has been stepping up on the production of some war materials. And we have to realize that at some point we have to go back to, if not a war economy, but a Cold War economy. And it's a very difficult decision to make, because the money that was freed by the peace dividend has been used for all sorts of clientelism, social and political clientelism. And now to go back on this and to have to tell people you'll have to tighten your belt if your notches because of national defense is a huge problem. And we've had this discussion right now in Switzerland, and after a few rounds, Parliament decided that okay, we would give additional money to Ukraine, but in terms of recreating the industrial capacity that we used to have, have a quite an impressive, like the Finns and like the Swedes, and now it's gone. So it's a real, and I'm also fascinated by the fact that here in the US, the defense industry is kind of in a waiting position, saying as long as we don't have a long-term commitment, we are not stepping up the production. And we are talking to them, and they say we need a long-term commitment. So as soon as this long-term commitment comes, the real American industrial machine will come into being, and then we'll see whether Russia can cope. And of course, it can't.
Terrific. Jake, I want to give you an opportunity to offer a response, thoughts, parting thoughts, and then we're going to move folks to my discussion previously held with both Senator Jim Risch that I did late last night, Doha time, where I am, and also Republican Congressman Brad Wenstrup from Ohio. So Jake, the floor is yours.
Thanks again for having me, Steve. I want to I would say that the comment that has stayed with me the most from the previous two speakers is the growing anti-American sentiment in Brussels. A would love to understand more about where that's coming from, if that's associated with the right-wing populism that is increasing in Europe, or whether that's coming from a different source. I don't know the answer to that question. I'll be interested to learn more. It's vital. I mean, NATO is the most important alliance in the world, and it's vital that it remains and strengthens its unity of purpose. That starts with ensuring victory for Ukraine. And we've got to stop shying away from that word, victory. That is the goal, victory for Ukraine. And anything short of that, I think, is going to sow the seeds of further strife.
That is terrific. Well, I want to thank Jake Auchincloss, representative from Massachusetts, involved in so many of the national security committees. Thank you so much for your time, my friend, and thanks.